Hi guys, today I'm going to open up the one-step loopers that I just bought, and I'm going to try them out on some wire, and then during the next week I'm going to use them in pretty much all of my projects so that at the end of this week I can put together an entire review for you. So you'll probably be seeing this part when I do my entire review because this is the introduction. So these are the one-step loopers. They are well, I don't know that they're manufactured, but they're at least sold by the Beadsmith. And they are a tool that you can use to make these simple loops. And the simple loop is just a loop on your jewelry making components or bindings that allows you to swing it open and closed in order to have it be one of those things. It's different from a wrapped loop, in that with a wrapped loop, I'm just going to show you how it differs a little bit. Because with a wrapped loop, you have your loop on the end, and it's a closed loop. Once it's closed and looped, you can't swing it open, you can't readjust it. And it's got the wire wrapped around the other end of your wire like that. That's what a wrapped loop looks like. So these tools will not create a wrapped loop for you. If you're going to use a wrapped loop for anything, you're going to need to still do it with the multiple steps and do it that way. And the reason why you might want a wrapped loop versus a simple loop is just for the strength of the loop. If you're doing something where you've got really heavy beads or it's lighter gauge chain, like 22 gauge, I'll usually use wrapped loops for, because simple loops sometimes can pull open. It's even with like medium temper wire. I've found with 22 gauge, it can sometimes be like that. But for heavier gauges like 20 or 18 or something like that, a simple loop is great, and it's just fine like that. But anyway, so that's a wrapped loop, and that is not what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be exploring these simple loops, and it comes in 3 different sizes, and I got all 3 sizes for this. I got the 1.5 millimeter size, and you can see right there it's got kind of that smaller loop there. You've got the 2.25 millimeter, and then you've got the 3 millimeter, and you can see this loop that it goes around there is a little bit bigger. But let's get these guys out, and let's grab some wire, and we'll just see what the loops look like, and I will start to get more familiar with these, because I think, like with a lot of tools that are new, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve with this. And Joey Ballesteri is the one who basically talks me into getting these. She was using them in one of her more recent videos that she did, and I was watching her do it, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to do it. You convinced me. We're going to do the one-step loopers, and she has a lot of really good tips for when she's doing it. Like she says, you know, she likes to do a thing where she leaves it on the thing and straightens out both ends of the loops, which is a really smart thing to do. But she's got some tips for making sure that the loop stays close to your bead and all of that. So I'm going to be trying to use her tips while I'm doing these. But let's pull out some wire too. I just grabbed some copper wire. I've got 20, 22, and 18 gauge wire. So let's try the 22 gauge first. And like I said, I usually like with 22 gauge or thinner to use wrapped loops. Like for definitely 24, you're going to want a wrapped loop on that. But let's just cut off a few sticks of wire, because this is just wire that I'm going to use to play around and figure out how this works and how I like it. All right. Whoop. So we've got this wire, and I did not bother with doing a flush cut on the end. Let's move these guys out of the way so that we can get a little bit closer here and actually take a look at what we're doing. So I did not do a flush cut on the end because I'm going to be using these. That's like the steps, the multiple steps, is the bending of the wire, making the loop and the cutting of it. This does all of that, or it's supposed to. So it looks like there's a little hole here in the back. So I'm not sure if when it's open all the way, if you just put this through the hole. And I don't know how much extra wire this is going to leave. So let's just, ooh, okay. And I think this is the thing that Joey was saying, you can bend it back from there. And that gives you your wrapped loop. Oh, maybe I bent it too far. I don't know. Hold on. I'm gonna scooch out a little bit because I am going off of camera. All right, so the loop isn't closed all the way. There's a little bit of space there. So probably something that I'm gonna need to do when I do my loops is going to be to grab my round nose pliers and just close that up a little bit like that. Okay, so that is the 1.5 millimeter loop. Let's try the 2.25 millimeter loop. Let's see what that size looks like. And this is on 22 gauge wire. I'm going to pop that in there, put it through the hole in the back. And yeah, it cuts it before it bends it. And this is, I'm not doing that bend back, and it's making that P shape, which sometimes you want. So I'm just gonna bend it back this way, pull it off of there. And it's a little bit wonky on the side, so it looks like I am gonna need to use my pliers to give a little smush. And using pliers to give a little smush is helpful though, because it can help doing a little tamp down on this to work hard in that loop to keep it from coming open. And I can use my pliers to close it a little bit. And that is the 2.25 millimeter. So that's the 1.5 millimeter. This is the 2.25 millimeter. And let's try the 3 millimeter one. This is the chonky boy. The chonky boy. All right. So we've got that there. And that's the part where it cuts it. I'd like to compare that cut with the flush cut. Oh, hold on. Let's put that back in there and bend that back. And the reason you bend the wire either before or after you do your loop is so that the loop is centered over the wire, so it's not, you know, off to the side. There's times when you want it to be off to the side though, and I've used those before for things and reasons. And this again is not closed all the way, so I'm going to use my pliers and just close it up a little bit. Okay, and tamp down on that loop to work hard in it. So this is 22 gauge wire. And these are my 3 sizes. This would probably be a really great way to get consistent loops on this, because I usually use, let me grab that wire. I usually use my round nose pliers for my simple loops, and I don't always get consistent sizes when I do that. I know there are tips and tricks that you can use to make sure you always get consistent sizes, but like it depends on where I put my barrel of my round nose pliers. These are the steps that I use for a simple loop. I will hold the wire, the flush end, within that barrel, and then we will turn it back until it touches the other side. And then I'll just put this underneath here so that we get that bend back. And that's usually how I do that. Now on the other end, after I put something on there, I'm going to bend my wire right next to my bead, measure about to there with my finger, cut my wire before I make my loop, and then pull this back. And like this is what I'm saying. You don't always get a consistent size when you do this. I don't always get a consistent size when I do this, but that's how I usually do a simple loop, is using my round nose pliers. And like I said, the size isn't always consistent. You can see this one's bigger than this one. It works for me, but if I can get more consistent sizes, then I think that will ultimately make me feel a little bit better about what I'm making. Now these were the 22 gauge wire. Let's do the same thing with some 20 gauge wire. 20 gauge wire, and then I'll pull out some beads. Oh, what did I do with this? Oh, that's fun. I'm gonna, I don't know if I'm gonna use that for something later. I'm just gonna cut that off there and pull a couple lengths off of there. So this is 20 gauge. And this wire, the Beadsmith wire, is medium hard. It's not German style, but it is medium hard. It's not dead soft. It's the Wire Elements ones on the spools. So let's get 3 of these. All right. So we've got those. Where am I going with this? That's right, smallest to largest. Now, do you have to put the end through that loop on the other side? Could I instead just maybe have my end be like right there? I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna scooch in just a little bit so you can see where I've got the end of my wire. I'm putting it right there. All right, let's see how that does. Well, it didn't cut it, but it did kind of bend it a little bit. I'm gonna scooch back a little bit because I was going off camera, I realize. Okay, so I could still manage to do the loop. I was just thinking about all of the excess wire that I was going to be ending up cutting off with every single loop that I made if I put the other end of that wire through the hole on the other end. So that seems like a decent loop. All right, so that is my 20 gauge wire, and here we go. So that's 22, this is 20. Let's do the 2.5 millimeter with the 20 gauge wire. And I'm going to try the same thing. I'm going to, instead of putting it through this hole in the back, I don't know if you guys can see the hole, instead of putting it through the hole, I'm just going to line up the edge of my wire right here. We're going to see what it does. Pull it back. All right. I think these loops are a little bit closer to closed with the 20 gauge wire than they were with the 22. Or maybe I'm just getting better at it. There we go, that's 22 and 20 gauge wire for the 2.25 millimeter. I think I really like this size, the 2.25 millimeter. Like if I was going to get just one, I think I'd get this one. Because they can get a little spendy. It was a little expensive to buy all 3 of these at the same time. So like if I was going to get just one, I think I like the size of the loop a lot on the 2.25 millimeter one. A lot. All right, and then we've got our 3 millimeter one. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm not going to put it all the way through. Hello. That popped right out. but I think it would have popped out anyway, even if I had put it through the thing, because it had cut by then. All right, so we've got that closed. While it's closed like that, bend it back. And that actually is a pretty decent looking loop. All right, I'm actually really happy with these loops so far. It is still a little bit open, so I'm just going to take my pliers, and I've got my finger against the back of it. I'm just going to close it up there. Give it a little tamp. So there we go. 22 gauge, 20 gauge. Let's try the loopers with some 18 gauge wire. Oof. Where's the end of this guy? This is thicker. I think these are rated for up to like 16 gauge, but I haven't got any 16 gauge. I mean, no, I do have some 16 gauge wire, but I don't think we need to do that for this video. Like, we're gonna go through and I'm gonna be using this to make some things. So I've got the 1.5 millimeter wire or looper and some 18 gauge wire, and I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna put it right there on the end instead of having it go through the little hole on the end. Bend that back. And that loop closed up really nicely. I didn't have to do a lot extra for that. But that is a very small hole. All right. Oh, and I was doing that while it was still on the spool. So let's put that one over there. All right, so that's 1.5 millimeter. And I've got the 22, 20 gauge, and 18 gauge wires right there. All right, let's do this with the 2.25 millimeter looper. Oof. I do have to stretch my hands really wide to get my hands around them. That could cause some strain, but probably not as much strain as repeatedly twisting your wrists in order to make the loops with the other wire. All right. And that loop closed completely. I didn't have to fiddle with that one. All right, and this was the 2.25 millimeter with 22 gauge, 20 gauge, and 18 gauge wire. So it seems like the 22 gauge wire we don't get the loop totally closed with. The 20 gauge, it's a little more closed with it, and then the 18 gauge, it's really nicely closed when it gets through making the loop. So far, I'm gonna say, oh yeah, it's the big stretch. It's the big stretch that I'm not real fond of. I don't have giant hands. All right, let's. This is the 3 millimeter one. And that isn't completely closed on that, but I did kind of have it a little bit weird on there. All right, so that's our 3 millimeter for 22 gauge, 20 gauge, and 18 gauge. I really like it. This loop on the 18 gauge. It is a little bit on the big side, or it is a little bit on the open side, so I'm going to just tip that down there using my looping plier. And I'm also going to just bend that back to center my loop. Actually, this hole. I'm going to start all over again with that one. Actually, let's see how it does with a bead right next to it. Grab one of my random extra beads that got cleared off from when I was doing a thing. I'm just going to slide this bead onto there. And because this was one of the things that somebody asked, how do you get it so that the loops are right next to the bead? And I don't know the answer to that, but let's find out. All right, so for this, I am going to go through the other end, and I've got, got the bead right up against the side. Ooh. You know, it does need to have a little bit of space there between the loop and that bead. It creates it automatically. I don't know if you guys can see. It creates it automatically right there when it's closing. All right, let me do that again with a different bead. But yeah, so the beads are gonna be a little bit loose on this. I think that that's something I can live with if it means that I'm going to be able to make more links, I don't know that there's a real way to overcome that with this. So let's try again. With another bead. And it might be like that you can get closer with some beads and not with others. So let's grab another bead from here. I'm gonna put it on here. And this is the 20 gauge. This one was the 18 gauge. And this is the 20 gauge. So let's turn it so that you can see the light on the metal and watch what it does a little bit easier and a little bit better. I've got this up against here. Now this is going to go around. It cuts in this part here in order for it to get the loop closed. It has to be able to make that bend, and it has to have that space for this part of the looper to fit between the loop and the bead. So that is going to be some space. All right. And that means that the bead is a little bit loose. I can't see a way to eliminate that unless it's going to be in this part of it where we've got this open space. Come on. Come on, autofocus. What are you doing? Where we've got that space between the edge of the loop and the other. Maybe we just have to go back in with some pliers. And when we close it, close up a little bit more of that space. It's an option, I'm guessing. So that's the 20 gauge wire. There is some space there. Let's do it again with the 18 gauge. I just really want to see what I'm getting with that. Let's do it with the 18 gauge and the 2.25 millimeter. So I want to see how that does. All right, so let's go ahead and cut this off. Make a loop on one end, like this. onto it, Bex. All right, so that's my one loop. Let's add a bead to that. Oop, that bead doesn't quite fit on 18 gauge wire. That's fine, because maybe this bead over here will. I've just got random loose orphan beads sitting on my desk. It's fine. Yep, that one fits just fine. Let's see. Let's see if we can't get this a little bit closer with the 2.25 millimeter bead. All right, so this is as close to the looper as I can get. It's gonna go through there, and it does push the bead away. It pushes that bead away so that it can do the thing. So when I pull it off, it's gonna be a little loose. Okay, so I guess the answer is that no, there is not a tip and trick that you can use, because mechanically it needs that space in order to do that. But look how easy that was to make this link, and look how even the loops are. I really like this. Okay, so I'm gonna plan some projects. I'm gonna be using these loopers. I'm probably gonna be using the 2.25. I think I like the loop that I get on this the most, but I might be using some of the other loopers for other parts of my projects when I get to them. But we're gonna do some beaded chains, and I'm gonna see how I like it. One thing I do not like is having to spread my hands so wide just to get my hands around it, and having to hold them that way while I get my wire in place. But like I said, I'm going to give this a fair shot and see if the convenience of having these loops just come out perfect every time is worth spreading my hands that wide for, and if it's worth having just that little bit of give. And I honestly, like, when I make my own loops, sometimes they're going to be loose too when I do them with my round nose pliers. So let me give these a shot, and I will come back to this video after I have finished some projects with it, and you guys will likely see some of those other projects during the week as I publish those videos. All right, guys, it has been a week, and I have used these one-step loopers on every project that I did this week. And I've gotten more used to them, and there are things that I like, and there are things that I don't quite like. And, you know, when you're evaluating a tool and whether it's going to work for you, you have to kind of evaluate whether, like, this one little thing that might be something you can ignore is something that you're gonna want to fix, or if it's going to give you more convenience, or if you know, balancing these things out. So I did use them to make loops with all my, I'm giving it a little tug so you can see that they're pretty solid loops on here with the beads that I made. I made beaded chain necklaces and some bracelets. I did some other types of loops. I figured out how to make these infinity loops, which was really, really cool. I'll put links to all of my projects, by the way, if you want to go watch those and see what my gut reaction was in the midst of it while we were processing and doing all this. So mainly I use them for making links. I use them for making these connectors, and I use them for making these drops. And I think I have to say that that is one of my favorite uses for these one-step loopers, is making these drops. And these drops I used the 2.25 millimeter loopers for, and these drops I used the 1.25 millimeter, and like both of them work just fine on that. Like if I was to choose like just one of them, because I did buy all three of them, but they are kind of an expensive tool, so if I was just to buy one of them, I would probably buy this 2.25 because it is the most versatile of them with that. But yeah, I think like when I make drops and when I do little dangles like this, the most tedious and time-consuming part of doing it is just making the drops, not necessarily putting things together. It's the part that I dislike the most, and using the one-step looper for these made it so easy that I'm probably going to be doing a lot more of them, if I'm real honest. It also did increase the ease with making links. It didn't take as much time to go through and make a whole bunch of links as it normally does when I'm doing my other, although I am pretty quick with my other tools. It makes these infinity links like just so easily. I put up a short real quick if you wanted to see that for that sort of thing, but I also showed how to do it when I was making this, and it's pretty good. Overall, I am happy with my purchase. I am glad that I bought it, and I'm happy to recommend it to my friends, because one of the things that that I noticed was that I wasn't twisting. I wasn't twisting my wrist. I wasn't twisting my arm. And that's the thing that happens when you're doing loops with these, is you're squeezing and twisting at the same time. So with the looper, you're just squeezing, and that's all you're doing. That's the only movement that you have to do with these hands. The thing I didn't like about it, and the part that what was a little bit strainy for me on this, is just how wide I have to spread my hands before I can close them. You can't really get the wire in here if your hands are already a little bit closed. Up here, that's just not going to work. You have to have it all the way spread. And I didn't like that. There was a little bit of strain for that. And I also noticed during this video, I did the entire thing on camera so that you guys could see how fast, slow, whatever it was when I did it. And I noticed afterwards, I had some strain right here in my wrist, right back here on this tendon. And I also had some strain in my elbow right here. And I was like, wait a minute, was it the one-step looper that did that? And I think the strain that I was feeling was holding it here in front of my hands at an awkward angle so you guys could see what I was doing, and repeatedly doing that like that, instead of holding it with my elbow like at a more comfortable angle, like to my side, and holding it maybe a further out without twisting it back on me so that you guys could see what I'm doing. Holding it at a more natural angle, like I did when I was making these links off camera for some of these other projects. I didn't have any strain doing those, but I did have some when I was doing all of my links, when I did all of these beaded links on camera with you guys. And it's probably because I was trying to hold it in such a way that the camera could see it instead of holding it in a more natural, relaxed way. So I did feel some strain, but I've identified that it wasn't the tool causing it. It was the way I had to hold it to do all of these things repetitively over and over again so you guys could see it. So I suffered for you. I hope you appreciate this. Anyway, that was a joke. It's fine. It's fine. But yeah, so if you've got like wrist strain or anything like this is going to be a really good way to get around that. You do have to open and close really wide. And I just like, these are the Casual Comfort tools that I did a review for these, and I've been using them since then. I love them so much because they're so easy to use and they fit in my hand so easily. And like the wideness of the grip on this, like the actual handles are nice and wide on here, which is fantastic. But like when I'm using these tools, I barely have to make any movement to be able to use them. You know, it's like it's already almost closed, and then it's just this small movement with my hands and fingers, and then maybe my wrist to do these movements. So having to like spread out my hand really big and then close it, it takes some getting used to. It takes some getting used to, but I do really love the consistency of my loops. I did have to adjust my loops, almost every single one, afterwards using my pliers just to tamp it down, which I wouldn't want to do anyway. so that you can work hard in your loops, and some of them to close them up again a little bit. I did break a couple of beads by getting the beads too close when I was doing the loops. They're not irreplaceable beads. They're not super fancy, expensive ones. So I'm okay with losing those to the learning process in order to be able to know, okay, I need to keep my beads a little bit of distance away from here when I put this in, and go carefully to make sure that we're not going to be like squeezing the life out of them and crushing them to death with some of these. I really like this one was with the 3mm loops. This one I used the 2.25 for my loops. And then this one was also 2.25. And so is this. That's why I'm saying like the 2.25 is the most versatile, I think. And if I was to just have to choose one of them, I might go with that one. But the 1.5 made fantastic drops. Like these little loops on the drops were just perfect. The perfect size to go with these smaller dangly beads. With this one, I used the 2.25, and while the loops on these were just fine for these drops, they could have been better with the smaller one. Like if I was to do this over again, I might use the 1.5mm. On this, I did notice that the loops close easier and are more structured if you use larger gauge wire, like 18 gauge or 20 gauge. Not so much with the 22 gauge. It's just probably a good idea too not to be doing simple loops with the 22 gauge because they can open up on them. But overall, my opinion on these is that as long as you're not, holding it at some weird angle, you probably are going to save on some strain, on some repetitive stress. And repetitive stress injuries are something to keep in mind when you're doing things like this with your hands, doing fine motor control things. It can be affected, and it's something to take steps to make sure that you can continue to make jewelry long into all of these further years. Like I don't have like diagnosed arthritis. It runs in my family, and sometimes I have like just a little bit of strain in I notice a little bit like in my tendons or doing things repetitively. When that happens, I will try to rest that, do some stretches. I've been doing, actually, let me show you guys some hand stretches that I've been doing for most of my life. Some of these I learned in middle school when I was in orchestra, and we did I played the violin, and that is to grab your hand right here. You want to grab over the full thing where these are, not up here at the top, because you don't want to bend your hand back. You want to bend your wrist back, right? And so you just stretch out your elbow as much as you are able to, and then press back gently with this hand, and it stretches out these tendons here. And like I used to do this every day when I went to work for a bank. I was an encoder, and that's where you do data entry very, very quickly with 10 key machines. And so that's one of those jobs where you can have like repetitive stress injuries. And you do the same thing with the top. You bend it back towards yourself this way, and then down again, back towards yourself this way. And again, pushing where the knuckles are so that it bends the wrist and not the hand. And then you can flip it over and bend it the same way with the other direction. And then you want to roll your wrists inward and then outward. And just keep doing that until you do that. And when you do these stretches and when you do these bends, you never want to do it to the point of discomfort or pain. You only want to do it to where you feel a little bit of a stretch there where your tendons are and all that. And then we would also stretch out our thumbs. You just take your fingers right here to the whole thumb area and push it back. And again, not to the point of discomfort or pain, but just to the point where you can feel a stretch right in here. And it's just a really good way to keep your hands healthy when you're doing some repetitive stress sort of tasks, some repetitive things where you're making the same movements over and over again with your wrists and with your hands. And I do this subconsciously. I don't even sit down and say, oh, hey, time to stretch my hands. I'm just like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to stretch my wrists a little bit. We're going to just do this fine. And then I can get to work and I can continue doing it. So those are just some stretches that I do that help with keeping my hand health up, because hand health is important when you use your hands to do things. Like it's very important for that. So thank you, Joey, first of all, for being such an advocate to looking at all these tools that can help and to make things there, and talking me into, in your video, getting these, because I've actually quite enjoyed getting to know them. You know, I've shared some of my frustrations during my videos, and most of my frustrations are going to be just having to fix the loops a little bit, because they were a little bit wonky, some of them. But it's not as big of a deal as, you know, not being able to make loops and not being able to make jewelry would be. Just having to fix the loops, if you're having trouble with your hands and you can't twist and do all of this at the same time to make these other loops, this is a great way to do it. And I'm actually probably going to be using these more, because I love the consistency that I get with these loops. I really like it, and it's going to make it so much easier for me to do dangles. Like all of these little dangly bits, like they're tedious and I hate them. And it was so easy and almost joyful to use them with the one-step loopers. So I'm probably going to be using those for those more. So get ready for dangles, guys. We're going to get more dangles. Get some jangles in our dangles. But that is my wrap up. This is my opinion. I'll go ahead and put a link to where I got these from. I got the whole 3 set from Amazon. But on that page, you can actually choose different sizes, and they have one of them, I think it's the 1.5 millimeter, that's available for left-handers. Because if you notice, for this is for right-handed people. So the left-handed one, it faces the other direction. So they actually do make these for left-handed folks to be able to use on those. And if you want to see my review for the Casual Comfort pliers and tools that I've been using, that I've been enjoying and are super easy on my hands, I'll put a link to that review as well. But I'm really enjoying all of these. I'll put links to each of these projects. I'll put links to where you can buy this, and I will put links to the Casual Comfort review if you didn't see that, because I've been using it and I've been loving it, and it makes it so easy to do this. What little strain I was feeling on my hands with the other tools has been almost eliminated by using these on a regular basis. I had some stuff with my wrists the other day, and Joey was showing us how to do the thing, and I was like, let's get some of these, because whatever I can do to forestall the strain is going to make it so that I can continue making jewelry far into the future. So take care of your hands, because that's how we make the pretty things. And thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you later. Bye.